You are about to learn how to install and remove blinds and orifice plates. This is one task you will be doing quite often. It requires skill and knowledge to do a safe job. The primary reason for installing blinds is for safety. We will now see what blinds look like. This is a slip blind. It is a circular flat metal plate with a handle. It resembles a ping-pong paddle. It is installed by slipping it between the faces of two flanges, whose bolts have been loosened and removed to permit entry. The diameter of the slip blind is generally the same as the outside diameter of the gasket with which it is installed. The pressure and rating of the piping governs the size and thickness of the slip blind. This is another type of blind you will use. It is called a blind flange. Where and when possible to disconnect the piping, this is the ideal blind to use. It bolts to the flange and can make a permanent installation. Quite often, these are referred to as blanks. For instance, at a gate valve, you could remove the valve and blank both ends of the piping. It is used often at pumps or other equipment where spool pieces can be removed. This type of installation requires lots of room to do the work. Yet another type of blind is shown here. The shape of this blind gives you a clue of the name. It is a figure-8 blind. It is used in installations where the blind is often installed and remains in the line as a permanent fixture. The normal procedure is to open the flanges and turn the blind. They are used frequently where the piping is so short and stiff that spreading the flanges is extremely difficult to accomplish. These blinds are used for a variety of purposes, such as isolating a piece of equipment to be opened up, or just isolating a piece of idle equipment from the working equipment temporarily. By isolate, we mean that we want to positively cut off any flow through the line or piece of equipment. Again, this is a safety precaution. For instance, we want to stop the flow inside this pipe so we can work on the other end. The question is, how do we stop the flow? Do you know the answer? Sure you do. Close the valve. You are right. But what happens if we close the valve and begin our work, and some helpful co-worker opens the valve by mistake? Or the valve leaks slightly because of a faulty valve, or maybe we didn't close it tight enough. Blinds are installed for one and only one reason. That reason is safety. As an extra safety precaution, this blind is correctly installed in the proper place so we can do our work on the end of the line as required and complete the task safely. Now, that valve can leak, or someone could open it, and whatever is in the pipe will go no further than this blind. The installation of this blind is a great safety factor, but it must be done correctly. We're going to show you how a little later in the program. The other piece of equipment we're going to show you how to install is this, orifice plate. It looks quite the same as the slip blind, except for the hole in the middle. It's obvious that this orifice plate is not used to stop the flow in a pipe. The basic purpose of an orifice plate is to help measure the rate of flow in the pipe. The hole in the plate is a purposeful constriction that creates a differential pressure drop, which in turn can be metered and recorded. The orifice plate is installed between these types of flanges. The orifice flange is thicker than an ordinary flange. It also has tapped holes in the side of the flange for small piping that leads to an instrument. These tapped holes are normally installed horizontal with the run of main pipe. It is possible to bleed off any pressure or material on either side of the flanges through the small piping to the meter. During the program, when we show you the actual installation of blinds and orifice plates, you will see the method is quite the same. But there is one basic difference that must be emphasized. Notice the stamping on the handle of this orifice plate. Generally, these plates have the stamping on the handle, and the plate must go in between the flanges one certain way. Generally, these stampings on the handle will face the upstream side of the pipe run. Quite often, these orifice plates have shaped holes or bevel sides of the constricting hole. It is extremely important for the installation of these plates that they be aligned in the flanges in the correct direction of the flow in the pipe. They must be installed properly, or the total installation will not function properly. One final word on blinds and orifice plates. They come in quite a few sizes and thicknesses. It is critical that the proper size and thickness be installed. Always be sure you have the correct size blind or plate for the particular job. Be certain you have all the information you need before using a blind or orifice plate. Your workbook contains some tables to show the various sizes of blinds. We have some exercise questions for you to answer on this introduction, after which we will show the procedures for installation. Turn to exercise number 1 of your workbook. This brings us to the actual installation of blinds. We will show you the correct procedures and methods for this task. As always, to do this type of work, what is the first step? Secure the proper work permit is the answer. Don't ever start a job like this without one. This is of the utmost importance. After all, you will be opening a line, and if for no other reason, you need to protect yourself from injury. The work permit will tell you everything has been prepared for your task, and you can do your work safely and securely. Another important suggestion. Be sure you have correctly identified the exact location where you are to install the blind. Don't take chances, as opening of a line could endanger yourself as well as the equipment or unit. In this case, be sure on which side of the valve the blind is to be installed. Remember that the two main precautions are: have the proper permit and the proper location before you begin work. With your permit and location taken care of, the next step is to get all the proper tools and materials together. Be sure you have everything: tools, right-size blind, gaskets, bolts, and nuts as required. Plan ahead for this type of job. Generally, this task, once begun, must be carried on to its successful completion. Don't forget your own personal safety attire. Hat, goggles, and gloves are a must. Always wear the proper safety equipment as may be required by your plant's safety standards. In some instances, some elaborate equipment may be necessary, even to wearing some sort of breathing apparatus. Better to be safe. Remember, one unsafe act can change your entire future. Assume a safe and comfortable position for the job. Select 2 bolts on the flange to leave tight while the others are loosened. One of them should be opposite you, and the other one on your side of the pipe. These 2 tight bolts hold the flanges together while you loosen the others. Start by loosening the bolts on the other side of the flange first, away from you, except for the one you plan to leave tight for the time being. Treat every line you work on as though it is under pressure. Now loosen the bolts on your side of the flange until you have all the bolts loose except for the 2 you left tight, one on each side of the flange. Leave the bolts loosely in the flange at this time. It's possible that the line may contain pressure, and the flanges will have to be closed in a hurry. In this case, it may be too slow to put the bolts back in place. Now that we have the bolts loosened, except for the remaining 2 we intended to leave tight, loosen the one on the opposite side from you first. Again, this is a safety precaution. Do not take the bolt out at this time. Remember, when the flange separates, we want the separation to begin on the side away from you. It's possible at this time the flanges will begin to come apart. If they do, and no release of pressure is present, fine. That's what we want. If the flanges do not come apart, insert a wedge in the flange on the side opposite from you. Tap the wedge in gently, just enough to force out the flanges on this side. Observe closely to see when the flange seal breaks apart. If no pressure is present now and the flanges are apart on the opposite side, we can proceed to the next step. Be very careful how the wedge is driven between the flanges. These are raised face flanges, and you can damage the gasket faces of the flanges. Never drive a wedge toward the center of the flange. This shows the relative position that the wedge should be driven. Notice the raised gasket face and the position of the wedge. You should use this procedure in all instances where you want to pry the flanges apart. With the gasket seal broken with the wedge, you should loosen the last bolt carefully and slowly. Again, remember, as the faces of the flanges open, we want the first crack to be on the side away from you. Continue to loosen this last bolt until it is very loose. Caution: as you loosen this last bolt, watch the wedge on the other side. It most likely will fall out. If the wedge loosens up, it's better at this point to remove it as a safety precaution. During some jobs, it may only be necessary to remove the bolts from the top half of the flange, and the bottom bolts can remain and are left very loose in the flanges. It really depends on the distance you have to spread the flanges apart to insert the blind between the flanges. If removal of all bolts is required, be cautious, as one or both ends may suddenly move and cause injury. In all cases, the flanges must be opened wide enough so the old gasket can be removed and the flange faces cleaned. This can be done in various ways. Wedges, flange spreaders, and other tools may be used. It's also possible the flanges may have to be pulled apart with equipment such as chain blocks, come-alongs, and other various types of equipment. Use good judgment and the proper procedures that would cover the use of any of the mentioned equipment. Now take the flange scraper and scrape off the old gasket. Be sure to clean the flange faces carefully. Even though installing blinds are of a temporary nature, you must realize they should not leak. Do this task as though it were a permanent installation. After a good cleaning job, the next step is to put the blind in place. Whenever possible, have at least the bottom few bolts loosely in place. This will help hold the blind in position for the remaining tasks. Always put the handle of the blind in a position where it is easily seen. Insert the blind into the opening between the flanges and let it rest on the bottom bolts. When the blind is in proper position, insert one gasket on each side of the blind. Remember, 2 gaskets for 1 blind. Use a scraper or other flat tools to position the gasket and the blind properly. Do not use your fingers. It is also acceptable to put the gaskets in first and then place the blind between the gaskets. In this case, be certain the blind is between the 2 gaskets. After you have the blind and gaskets positioned, align the flanges as required and install the bolts and nuts. Tighten the bolts just hand tight now. Watch the position of the blind and gasket when you align the flanges. Remove the wedge or device you use to open the flanges. Remove the wedge or device carefully. Tap it lightly with a hammer, being careful not to let the wedge fly out. It may hurt someone. Could be you. Being sure your flanges are aligned and the blind and gasket is in place, tighten 2 of the bolts, 1 on each side of the flange. Tighten the side of the flange that is open the most first. Don't tighten them all the way, just enough to hold everything in alignment. Now you are ready to tighten the bolts completely. Use the proper wrenches or power tools for this job. When you tighten bolts in flanges like these, they should be tightened in the proper sequence. Be sure to use the crossover method. This is the most desired method to use. Now let's see how it works. Remember, we said to install and hand tighten all the bolts. To complete the tightening of the bolts in the flange, use the crossover procedure. And this is how it works. First, tighten this first bolt snug. Now reach across the flange and tighten the second bolt. Notice this second bolt is opposite the first. At about 90 degrees from the first or second bolt tightened, tighten the third bolt. It can be top or bottom as long as it is at about 90 degrees from the first 2. Now across the pipe again. The fourth bolt to tighten is opposite the third. Continue this procedure until all the bolts have been tightened. You possibly will have to retighten the first bolts. Be sure all the bolts are tightened about equal. The idea is not to tighten the bolts in rotation and to have the flanges faced up with each other. After all bolts have been tightened, remove your tools and other equipment from your work area. Notify the proper authority of your completion of the task. The blind is now installed, and the safety aspects have been covered. Everyone can feel a lot safer working on jobs down the line, thanks to you for doing your part safely and efficiently. The removal of the blind is very similar to its installation. Use the same techniques for opening the flanges. And one important thing to remember: while removing blinds, be certain that the two gaskets, one on each side of the blind, are removed. Then clean the faces of the flanges and install a new proper gasket and tighten the flanges using the methods previously covered. We have some questions for you in exercise number 2 of your workbook. Turn now to this section and follow directions. In this segment, we want you to see how to correctly install and remove an orifice plate. Although the procedures are about the same as for blinds, there are some differences worth noting. These differences could save time, money, and possibly injury. Not to be repetitious, but to emphasize the point, get the work permit, the proper safety equipment, the correct tools for the task, and last but not least, the required information and equipment you need to do the job. One other safety point: always approach this task of opening flanges as though it were under pressure. It's best to be on the safe side and to be extra cautious. On most orifice flange installations, the piping can be bled off through the small piping that goes to the instrument. It's another precaution that you should do. But still, open the flange using the method as follows. Now, the procedure for opening orifice flanges follows closely to opening any type of flange. Begin by loosening the bolts around the flange. Be sure to leave one bolt on each side tight. Loosen the bolts on the opposite side of you first. Loosen all the flange bolts except for one on each side of the flange. This again follows the procedure for all flanges. Now we are ready to open the flange. Loosen the bolt which you left tight on the flange opposite from you first. This is again for safety reasons. If the pipe should contain any hydrocarbon or liquid, the idea is to release it away from yourself. The flanges at this time may or may not come apart. It is a good practice to insert a wedge between the flanges on the side opposite from you. Tap it in with your hammer. The flanges should start to come apart at this step. Be careful with the wedge. Do not drive it toward the center of the pipe. You may damage the orifice plate or the faces of the flanges. You can carefully loosen the last tight bolt on your side of the pipe. Loosen the bolt slowly and tap the wedge in steps. Loosen a little, tap in the wedge. Again, the idea is for the first opening of the flanges to occur on the side away from you. Remove the top bolts in the flanges so the orifice plate can be removed. If the handle of the plate is not on the top, remove enough bolts on each side of the handle to remove the plate. It may be necessary to insert the second wedge opposite the first to open the flanges wide enough to allow removal. Pull the orifice plate from between the flanges and be sure to remove the old gaskets. Take reasonable care during removal so you won't damage or scar the orifice plate. Orifice plates are generally removed for inspection and cleaning. The same plate would go back if found to be satisfactory. Be certain, if possible, to look at the markings on the plate. This will be important when the plate is installed. You should clean the gasket faces of the flanges using a scraper or other flat tool. Be sure to remove all the old gasket material from the faces. With the gasket faces clean, you are ready to reinstall the orifice plate. This is where the real difference between the blind and the orifice plate installation becomes obvious. Since both sides of the slip blind were identical, it didn't matter which way it was inserted. It does make a difference with the orifice plate. Check the markings or the tag, if one is attached, for directions. Now, these directions will tell you which side of the plate should be upstream or against the flow in the pipe. It may be necessary for you to check with the proper authorities, such as your supervisor, instrument technician, or process operator, to find out what the direction of flow is in the piping. Be certain you know exactly how they want the orifice plate installed. If it is not properly installed, it will not function as it should. Now you can insert the plate between the flange faces. If you remove the bottom flange bolts, they should be installed to help hold the plate in position. Align the plate and insert one new gasket of the proper size on each side of the plate. Position them with some flat tool. Do not use your fingers. Remove the wedges carefully and check again for plate and gasket alignment. Replace the bolts as required and tighten them hand tight. Watch for the plate alignment as you do this. Tighten 2 bolts, one opposite the other, to face up the flanges. Tighten them just enough to hold the plate and flanges securely. Check your alignment of the flanges as you bring them together equally with these 2 bolts. After you have clamped the plate in place with the first 2 bolts, use the crossover method and tighten the remaining bolts of the flange. Watch the alignment as you tighten the bolts. Try to pull the flanges together evenly and equally all around. Be sure all the bolts are tightened and your job is complete. That is, after you have practiced some good housekeeping in your work area. Up to this point in the program, when we opened the flanges, we used wedges. Orifice flanges also have openings like these for jack bolts to aid in spreading the flanges apart. The use of a jack bolt can easily be used instead of wedges in lots of installations, but certain procedures must be followed. The next few slides will cover the use of and show why and how they can be used. Generally, orifice flanges come with this jack bolt and nut. One of the precautions that must be considered for their use is the position of the plate handle. When an orifice plate installation is like this one, only one jack bolt can be properly used. The bottom one can be used. You can see if you use a jack bolt through the top hole, you would actually be damaging the handle of the plate. Although the use of a thinner nut would let the nut fit in the slot, you should not damage the plate. This is the proper way to use the jack bolt. Insert the nut in the slot, and then the bolt through the hole of the flange. Engage the threads and continue tightening the bolt, and it acts like a screw jack and will force the flanges apart. This is the point to remember. The safest way to open a flange is to make the side away from you to open first. Now, that's the reason we leave one bolt tight on the flange, and that one is the one next to you. It is possible to accomplish this with the jack bolt if you carefully follow the sequence of loosening the bolts of the flange. If the handle of the plate is not in the way, you can put a regular nut into the slot. But this word of caution: if the flange is to be closed without the orifice plate in between the faces, the regular nut will not allow the faces to come together properly. When the jack bolt is removed, the regular size nut could be jammed so hard it could not be removed. You would have to wedge open the flanges to remove the nut. This is a pair of orifice flanges bolted together properly to be able to accommodate the use of 2 jack bolts. The handle of the plate is offset between another set of bolt holes, so the jack bolt opening is clear. Use the proper size nuts, and the use of jack bolts will cause no problem. On quite large flanges, the use of jack bolts is a time saver and a work saver. We have some questions for you on the installation and removal of an orifice plate. You'll find them in exercise number 3 in your workbook.